Thanks, everyone, for joining us at the Project Censored Radio Show. I'm your co-host, Eleanor Goldfield, along with Mickey Huff, and we're very glad right now to welcome to the program Kei Pritsker, who is one of the co-directors of the film The Encampments and a journalist with Breakthrough News. Kei, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the film, The Encampments, folks might have heard about it. It's been making the rounds with a lot of screenings and getting quite a bit of hype. And it's perfect timing because we're just past the anniversary of the encampment starting at Columbia in April of 2024. And I actually wanted to just dive right in and start with a question that's central to the students' demands in the film. And you dig into this a bit in the film as well. The arguments against divestment, which they're typically like, oh, it's too hard because these things are so entangled, right? You can't really divest from a nation like that. Could you talk a little bit about the fallacy of that argument and what divestment means as a tactic?
Yeah, I mean, it's a ridiculous argument because it's so simple. Just sell your stocks. Like, let me into your Robinhood account, let me into your E-Trade account or whatever, and I'll do it for you. Sell your stocks, sell your holdings, and they actually. This is in the film, but the Columbia University actually divested from Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. So I don't really know what they're saying. People divest from things all the time. Columbia divested from private prisons. So what exactly is so difficult about divesting from genocide? I mean, if anything, I think that should be the easiest thing because it's such a heinous crime. And it's something that everyone has seen in the last 18 months. I don't think there's anyone on earth that doesn't know what's happening in Gaza. So what is so hard about it? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, and I especially appreciate that you pointed that out in the film that, hey, they divested from Russia, so it's not even like it would be a difficult thing to repeat, like it's been done. And on the subject of entanglement, I wanted to get into the web of extralegal proceedings on college campuses, and I want to get to the NYPD issue as well, but I want to talk about the kind of cocooned injustice systems that work on these campuses that, as you point out in the film, have to date targeted more than 20 students with expulsion, suspension, or revocations of their degrees, with seemingly no way of appealing that decision. Whereas if I partake in an occupation or in an action out in the streets, I can't, like, even if I go to court, they can't be like, well, I'm expelling you. Like, that's not something that happens even in our remarkably kangaroo court system. And we recently had on the show Thea Chattel, who's a student at Yale. And she did some journalistic work exposing the Orwellian tactics by Yale PD. And it seemed clear that with your movie as well, the sign when you enter into these college campuses should read, abandon all constitutional rights, ye who enter here. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting about colleges these days is that they are essentially an extension of the national security state. Any college you go to, especially the ones, especially prestigious ones or ones that are close to power, like in Washington, D.C., they have these departments that are literally doing research, whether it's for weapons companies or for, they're training people for intelligence agencies. I mean, they're very closely ingrained. And if you've heard some of the stories of people who have, say, been like recruited into intelligence agencies. One comes to mind, John Kiriakou was recruited out of the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, which is where I went to school, to the Elliott School specifically. And if you go to any of these schools, you know that there's such an overlap between the politics and the curriculum of these schools and of these classes and like the literal doctrine of the national security state in the United States, so much so that in many cases the classes are taught by people for me it was like State Department officers. Like that was seen as like a very prestigious thing, like, oh my God, my professor works at the State Department. But it's like, hold on a sec, what are the implications
Right.
of that? I mean, it's really crazy. That was like a point of pride. And then, of course, at Columbia, it's even worse. You have, for example, Hillary Clinton she was, treated as like this special guest. She was given the right to basically teach. I don't know that she has the credentials to teach, but she was given a class there And, I'm sure a lot of students are like over the moon. Oh my God, Hillary Clinton is my professor. But really, when you think about it, these schools really serve as not just as hubs that train people to replace the next generation of warmongers and generals and war profiteers, so on and so forth, but also then it's like a revolving door. They serve to then rubber stamp everything that the national security state is doing, whether it be through research, whether it be through, archival work or what have you. Columbia University was doing research for the weapons manufacturers and the Pentagon in the lead up to the Vietnam War. George Washington University, where I went, was doing the same thing. One of the biggest national like weapons laboratories was in my school. So, I mean, they're so intertwined. And sorry, not to be so long winded, but the way this sort of manifested at Columbia was heinous, and there were these revelations. There was a story published in the Washington Post about how the billionaires in just the billionaires around scattered around the country. You're a local billionaire. All these billionaires had a group chat with the New York City mayor, Eric Adams, and they were basically writing to him after October 7th. They were writing to him constantly about, uh, you know, we want you to do this, we want you to do that. And when the Columbia encampment started, they were in that group chat basically saying, you have to shut this down. You got to crack down. You got to do more. And ultimately, obviously, we saw what happened. The NYPD came in with, a explosive resistant vehicles and flak vests and stun grenades, and basically SWAT raided a bunch of students who were, peacefully demonstrating inside a building. So, it really that raid, I mean, I think people forget that wasn't just a raid that took place on Columbia's campus. That was really the signal to the rest of the country that this is how we're going to deal with anti-genocide protests. It's not going to be, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to recognize that maybe the students might be making a good point, a decent point about like not investing in genocide. Instead, we're going to totally sweep all their demands under the rug. We're going to pretend like they're total insane, ridiculous people, and we're just going to treat them like criminals. And that was the sort of instigating moment for the rest of the country to respond in the exact same way. So, this is a sort of long way of answering your question, but I would say that this event at Columbia really showed how important the state sees the activities on campuses. They see it as a very important testing ground for the ideas of the future. And when they feel like they're losing the mass sentiment, when they feel like they're losing the popular sentiment of the youth especially, they freak out. And they were using Columbia and all the campuses as an example to show what happens when you step out of line.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those images were very reminiscent of like there were a bunch of Occupy encampments that were at college campuses. And the famous image of a police officer at close range tear gassing or pepper spraying, I don't remember which, I guess it was pepper spraying a couple of like students that were literally just sitting on the ground linking arms. And it became a very powerful image of that time. But it's repeated, history repeats itself. And with that, I wanted to talk about something because in the film, you include footage and descriptions of the 1968 occupation of Hamilton Hall, which is now known as Hinds Hall, and show that was an inspiration for what students did last year. And I'd like you to discuss some of that historic comparison here. For instance, the fact that when students occupied the university in 1968 versus today, what does the response, for instance, of the administration and the NYPD, what does that say about the trajectory of not just our schools, but our country? The fact that, for instance, after 1968, the NYPD was banned from Columbia. Obviously, they were not banned last year. They were allowed on campus with MRAPs, as you pointed out. What do you think this says about the trajectory of not just the schools, but in terms of the country and the rise of this kind of fascism?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really crucial question, and I think it's something that is kind of maybe getting a little lost, is like the fact that a 50-year precedent of the NYPD never setting foot on campus was broken essentially because of the wishes of a foreign country that's committing a genocide, you know, is should be really startling and alarming to all Americans. I saw a video from University of Michigan where students were having their door broken, like beat down with a battering ram by the FBI, local police, state police, attorney general involved because of their involvement in the encampment. I don't even think some of these students are like visa. I think they're US citizens. Point being, now you have the FBI and state police being deployed against American citizens whose only crime is essentially protesting a war, a genocide. And the fact that it is now basically de facto illegal to to speak in favor of Palestine, it's now a deportable offense. Like I keep telling people, I don't think there's another country you can get deported for criticizing is mind-boggling. And it says two things. I mean, one, it says that the state they are clearly trying to reorient, and this will, whether or not Palestine is your issue doesn't matter, because they're saying, look, if you say anything we don't like, we're gonna deport you, we're gonna imprison you, we're going to take your phones, we're going to wiretap you, we're gonna do all these things. The Constitution, that that was like I mean, that they did away with that during Occupy, Patriot Act, way before that, civil rights movement. But any semblance of constitutional rights obviously has gone out the window. So this affects all Americans. But moreover, I think it is really revealing that it's not even like any of the things that because obviously there were protests under the first Trump administration, but I think the fact that it's Palestine that has been the issue that has really just like struck a nerve with not just the Trump administration, but with the national security state says a lot. And it says a lot about the influence of the Israel lobby in the United States. I mean, it was an Israeli organization, Betar, which has a U.S. affiliate, Betar U.S., that was feeding the names and identities of students to the Trump administration for deportation. And, the fact that they're essentially acting on the behalf of a foreign country that is internationally recognized as committing a genocide, as being responsible for, all the crimes against humanity you could possibly imagine, should be kind of alarming. But it is essentially, this has become the policy of the administration. And of course, it's worth pointing out that Donald Trump received $100 million from Miriam Adelson. She received $100 million from a person whose husband said that that everything he does is for Israel, that all he ever wanted in life is to be a good citizen of Israel. I mean, this is really shocking. He obviously, before he passed, would fund he was one of the main benefactors of Birthright, which is essentially just, a soft power arm of foreign government to trick young people, to trick young American Jews specifically into thinking that their stake as a Jew is in some ultra nationalist Jewish ethno state. So, I think it shows how much I think the Trump administration is loyal to Israel. Obviously, you look at their cabinet. I mean, it's literally packed to the brim with fundraisers for Israel. Israel lobbied politicians like Marco Rubio and Tulsi Gabbard and Mike Huckabee and all these people, people that believe in this crazy messianic prophecy, like Pete Hegseth, who believe that bringing all the Jews back to Israel will bring about the end times prophecy in the Tanakh and the Christian Bible. So, I mean, it is a level of extremism that I feel like that has fully taken power in the White House. And yeah, that should be very, very concerning to all Americans.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many threads to pull on there, but just like trying to imagine if people were occupying space against Russia, if it's like for Ukraine, do we really think there would be that kind of response? No, of course not, because it would align with the US policy. So really, the crime isn't that you're speaking out against Israel. The crime is that you're speaking out against US policy, and Israel is a colony of the United States. Ergo, you can't do that. And I think, with that history lesson too, I think it's important to note that 1968 is just a few years before the Powell memo, and things like that, which really made a push to make universities fall in line with the establishment because they were very upset about the protests that generated at university campuses across the country against the Vietnam War, against US policy. So there was this push in the deep state, if you will, against those kind of actions. And that's why you see the push to make universities more conservative, whether that be having the State Department or the likes of Hillary Clinton be the faculty all of a sudden as if they were professors, and really trying to make sure that they were pushing out good, obedient proles that would do the bidding of the U.S. empire. And it also, there's something that it hit me when I was watching your film also was like, as somebody points out, who was involved in the 1968 occupation, it was okay then, but it's not okay now. And this sort of like habit of the US of always whitewashing, like like the FBI celebrates MLK Day, and you're like, oh, that's just irony is dead. And really speaks to how we are pushed into this sort of like goldfishization of how we recognize history and how we use history to either support the United States empire or support actual popular uprisings. So um, there is that aspect of it as well. And I wanted to kind of circle back to the Occupy because it felt both warm and a bit triggering to watch some of that, where because we were also holding space and attacked by cops and things like that. But the occupation itself was a remarkable community event. And even you show that even with the gates locked and basically like people imprisoned inside the school and people not allowed to get into the school, there was community involvement between the gates, right? And it really shows that it's a powerful inspiration and a fuel to our struggle, as well as a salve, like an acknowledgement that, like, amidst all this gaslighting, oh, we're not the crazy ones for being angry and despairing. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, like the encampment or occupation as a tactic that not only forces the hand of the establishment because they can't ignore it like a march or a petition, but also as a community building tactic and how you saw that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really brilliant tactic, and I think that's part of the reason the whole movement took off is it's essentially on one hand, it's completely visible to everyone. They did it right in the center of campus, and it's like it's really a challenge. Like they're issuing a challenge to the university saying, "Look, we're here. Like, come talk to us. Come actually like acknowledge us. Come actually treat us like we're a legitimate stakeholder here instead of pretending like we don't exist. You can't ignore us. You can't just ban our groups. You can't just, ignore everything that we're saying. We're going to be in the most visible spot on campus and, there's nothing you can do to stop us from spreading our message." And then, on the other hand, like like I think it was really brilliant that like they weren't really being hostile in any way. Like they just set up their own community and they were talking amongst themselves. They were talking to anyone that entered the encampment. They'd set up like a little town essentially. And that, it's like they're not antagonizing the university per se. It's not like they're going up to administrators and yelling at them or like spray painting buildings or anything like that. They're just sitting in the middle of campus talking to other students about what the university is doing that's wrong. And that alone they knew would be massively threatening to the university because that's exactly what they don't want is they don't want students to basically have this consciousness that they have an obligation to that they are essentially paying into a endowment fund that is invested in Israel's genocide. So I think it was in the sense that they they were kind of they weren't going after the university so directly, but in a way they were going right for what they care about, which is their perceived legitimacy. So yeah, I mean, I think it was really brilliant what they did. And, yeah, it's very visible. It was, and it was, you know, sort of easily replicated too. I mean, you know, anyone can really, can just pick a piece of grass. It's, I mean, you know, it's a fun thing. You set up some tents, and, you know, it's kind of, people can participate in many different ways. Like, you don't have to be the one organizing all the, you know, programming or whatever. You could help run food. You can, you know, do security. You can help people like collect blankets. There are all different kinds of ways people can contribute. And, yeah, it builds a community. Like you're saying, you know, it builds a community, and it helps get people to know each other, and you sort of have a collective feeling of, we are in this together. We are trying to maintain this community together. Everyone has sort of buy-in. So yeah, I mean, I think it was a great tactic.
Yeah, and I love it too because it really something that I fetch about as an organizer is like we can't just always be against things. We need to be against things, obviously, but we also need to say what we're for. And an encampment like that is a beautiful example of like this is what we'd like. We'd like a community where everybody has a role, everybody is important, and everybody is appreciated for their skills, and everybody's welcome. And this is an example of like the emergent future that we could build together that is the antithesis of the oppressive, unjust system that we're currently living in. So it's a beautiful example, which is also, of course, why it's dangerous, you know, the threat of a good example. So it's dangerous on several levels. And I'd like to, you know, since we're at the about like the 1 year anniversary roughly, I'd like to kind of ask the where are they now question, because at the end of the film, you point out there's a slide that reads nearly 300 Gaza solidarity encampments were set up globally. And in the US, 3,100 students and faculty were arrested. So that's a hell of a legacy, both beautiful and horrible. And so I was wondering what kind of what do you see happening now, if you see anything happening now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, what's happening now is that all the encampments are being shut down. They're being shut down preemptively before they even start. You know, the Howard University tried to start an encampment right after, on the anniversary of the Columbia encampment, April 17th. The police immediately showed up. You know, it was immediately shut down. Yale had an encampment, but they had to close because they knew it would get shut down. Columbia was planning something, and their meetings got infiltrated by Zionists. So, you know, it's like, there's there's clearly fear that that another encampment movement could start. The state, you know, the Israel lobby, they don't want that. You heard, you know, Netanyahu in the film, he says, this is like 1930s Germany. I mean, they're trying to frame it in the most extreme, like ridiculous framing, because they are truly alarmed by this. Because again, the biggest threat facing Israel is is losing its own legitimacy. And you only trot out an example or a comparison to Nazi Germany if, you know, the stakes are that high. And for Israel, the stakes are that high. They see this as an existential threat, because the younger generation turning their back on Israel is like, I mean, it's game over. Once they lose the support of American young people, it's over, because the money's going to stop coming, the weapons are going to stop coming, and they won't be able to hold out their fortress. So, you know, the situation is absolutely dire for them. And yeah, I don't think they can really control it at this point, unless they basically make it illegal to set up an encampment. So that is essentially the policy they're trying to roll out. A lot of the students I'm in touch with, you know, they're saying, I mean, they're facing all kinds of repression from the administration. So I think, you know, they're working overtime to try to basically beat back the attacks that are coming their way. And obviously the many of the schools have, not all of them, but Columbia, for example, Princeton, I believe, a lot of these schools are getting their funding pulled uh for essentially not cracking down on anti-Semitism, aka, you know, anti-genocide speech. So yeah, I mean, that's another big dynamic that the students are sort of contending, is the administration's are so beholden to money that they have basically expressed willingness to do anything to stop pro-Palestine speech on campuses. So their administrations are now actually fully like digging their heels in against the Palestine movement, except for Harvard, I think, sort of tried to put up like some modicum of autonomy, but we'll see what happens. But obviously, the landscape is very different a year out.
Yeah, and I think it also shows the importance of like a diversity of tactics and recognizing as the indigenous anarchist Clete Benali put it, it's not if you get infiltrated, it's when. And so what kind of uh, processes do we have in place to address that? And I think it's difficult, and it is yeah, it's a difficult road. But I also, with the time we have left, we have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask you also because there's several instances in the film where I see from the camera view that the police are yelling at you or Zionists are yelling or what have you. I'm curious to hear what it was like as press, because obviously something that we talk a lot about on Project Censored is press freedom, or really the lack thereof. And so I'm curious how it was for you as press, understanding that in reality you are allowed everywhere in order to cover the news and to get that out to the world. But what was that like for you, and what kind of barriers to your access to freedom of the press did you experience in filming this film?
I mean, honestly, the one thing I'll say is I had more access than most people because the students supported me because they're familiar with my reporting. For those who don't know, I'm very outwardly pro-Palestine in my reporting. So the students felt like of all the media organizations that were showing up, I wasn't going to come and try to twist their words or anything. So that was one thing that really helped. That's how I was able to live amongst them. But um, as far as the barriers, I mean, they were letting media in for like a few hours or select hours, but eventually that stopped and they just locked the campus down. So I couldn't leave because if I left, I wouldn't get back in. So it did get very challenging, but I actually would say there wasn't so much press censorship. I think it was more the main sort of repression, I think, was just a surveillance of the students.
Yeah, and that's something if folks are interested in hearing more, we had Thea Chattel, again, a Yale student who, via a FOIA request, saw really the deep, the depth and the breadth of surveillance vis-a-vis Yale PD and their collusion with federal law enforcement and the like. It's, I mean, Orwellian like doesn't even cut it anymore, I feel. It's ridiculous, but so okay, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about this really important film that is both remarkably inspiring and horrible at the same time. So where's a good place for people to access it or to learn more about where to find a screening?
Yeah, so you can request a screening by going to Watermelon Pictures website, and there's a screening request form. Just fill it out, and they'll be in touch with you. So, yeah, we're trying to basically get the film in front of as many people as possible by uh, utilizing the movement, by pulling on the support of the Palestine movement. So it's super crucial if you have like a living room, if you have a projector, if you have anything, if you have a way to screen the film, fill out that form and show it to your friends, your family, organize something. And yeah, tell the truth, show the truth about who these students are. They're not criminals, they're not violent, they're not terrorists. They're actually the peacemakers, and they're the ones calling out the real terrorism, the real terrorist state of Israel. And yeah, they're heroes. What they're doing is heroic. So, you know, um, show the film, because I think 10 years from now, the question will be, what were you doing during the genocide? And, I think looking back, hopefully this film and everything that the movement has made, all the media, all the journalism, all the films and music and art and everything will reflect who the real heroes were.
Yeah, very well put. And I also appreciate in the film that you uplift and share journalism from Gaza. So there's footage from Gaza. There's footage from from solidarity from Gaza. So I think that that's also really important. So it's not just a film for people to see if they're interested. It's a film for people to see if they haven't already been exposed to the realities on the ground in Gaza, because that's something that you also importantly share. So we really get to see the visual of like, why were these students out there? Why did they feel it was important? Okay, pan to the reality. So I thought that was really powerful and important. Kei, thank you again so much for taking the time to sit down with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it.